Hey guys, so today we're back with part 2 of our in-depth training for ProPresenter. So today I'm going to go over some troubleshooting tips, just to try and cover some basics of things that we consistently see, to give you guys the tools to be able to maybe attempt to troubleshoot things on your own. I know it's sometimes hard to get a hold of Chad and I, especially if we're both on a position on that weekend. So today we're going to go over how to fix some things like the screens, if they get messed up, how to fix, like sometimes the slides will do weird things and backgrounds get left up or not, or they don't work right, or they don't trigger. So we're going to do that, and then we're also going to go over how to set up audio outputs, because I know those are kind of the big three things we have to work on. So first off, today we're going to go over is the slides. So typically, the biggest issue we have sometimes, and more than likely this will only happen in Amped, you'll click on a slide, say like this lower third right here. I'll click it, and as you can see, lower third pops up. It's good to go, but I'll come over, hit this blank slide, but I still have that lower third graphic there, and it's kind of like, okay, why did it do that? Well, the reason it did that is because there's a thing on here for the slides called foreground or background. You always want foreground except for one exception, and that is if it's the jump back videos behind the lyrics in a room. What that setting does is it allows the graphics to either stay behind something while you scroll through. So right now, there's nothing it's going to show. But basically, it just leaves that graphic up so you can just change text boxes over top of it constantly without the graphic changing. That's why when you see like in Amped, you can click that first video that you'll see and it'll just keep going while you go through the different lyrics. It's going to set the background. So you really want background specifically just for the creative stuff like that. Any other time, we're always going to put stuff to foreground so we don't run into this issue of graphics staying up when we don't want them. So the way to do that, you're going to right click whichever slide has the graphic that's acting funny or being weird or you want to change, and you're going to come down to, it's going to be media action behavior. So you can see it set the background, and we're going to move it to foreground. Now another way to tell right off the bat if a slide is set correctly, if you look in this top left corner of the slide, there's this little image icon. See, now it's on foreground, the image icon, the gray box is on the back, the image icon's on the top. If we come back and we go to media action behavior to make it back to background, you'll see that it swaps. The little gray box is on top, image is on the back. So that's a quick way to tell, like, hey, if it's going to work or not, or if something happens and you notice that it does this weird trick and you're like, oh, no, I don't want that, you can tell real quick if the next slide's going to do it or not. Sometimes in Amped it happens because for whatever reason, when you drop in new slides, it'll import the lower thirds or it'll import images as background. Even though it's not supposed to, sometimes it'll still do it. It's just a bug. But if it does happen to you as well and you're like, how do I get rid of it quickly? You can always just clear all. Once again, that clear all button up here in the top right is a good way to just clear everything. So that's how you can fix the slides. So now we're going to talk about how to fix screens. A lot of times when things get shut down, power goes out, they sit for a long time, and I'm sure everybody with the screens kind of get all jumbled where maybe your stage display is on like a projector, and then like your stage display isn't working and it's just showing like a computer background or vice versa or whatever's happening. I'm going to try and give you some basic tips on how to troubleshoot it quickly. So first things first, if you're not getting any video output at all, and ProPresenter is on and everything else is on and plugged in, always check this top right over here. There's two little icons called audience and stage. They have little green icons next to them. You can click them and turn them red, but if they're already red, essentially that red light just means the outputs are off, so you always want to make sure they're green. So try that first. It's still not working. We're going to go over here to ProPresenter on the top left, click it, go to preferences, come down to these tabs, and we're going to click screens. So you're going to click this configure screens button on the top right. We're going to click it. Another submenu pops up. I know it's a lot. The menus just are kind of deep sometimes on the software. You're going to see the audience tab and the stage tab. And you can see this little switch next to both. And when I hit it, it'll change the buttons up here on the top right again, just to let you know if they're on or off. You always want them on. If you're trying to make it work, make sure it's on. This room is the only exception with two outputs on the audience one because we have an online output and a main room output. Live is the only room with that. So don't worry if you're in another venue and you don't see that. Just look for your main, or you should only have one output on the audience. You can click it and check. So down here in the middle of this thing, it'll have a little output box. Make sure on that output box, whatever is selected, that one, something is selected, and two, that it doesn't say disconnected. Sometimes on the right next to the label, it'll say disconnected, which means for whatever reason it's not seeing something. That's fine. Usually you can come and click and you can find that same thing again. And it's usually, so like right now we have this 2RC video editing NDI1 selected. If it's disconnected, it usually will have a second one that says the exact same thing, just disconnected. In the other rooms, it might say Black Magic, it might say Decimator. Just click the one that doesn't say disconnected next to it, and it should work. For your stage displays as well, there's technically a secondary display off the computer. Some of the rooms, your main display is that as well. And so instead of like just these little tab options, you'll have to click up here on the system ones that actually give you like physical screen layout looks. You don't ever want to click the iMac one, because that'll just make this main screen that you have right here turn into whatever that output is you're trying to assign. You don't want that, obviously. Usually you're going to want one of the system displays. So for us, our stage display is just the secondary display, and we only have one. So that's easy enough. So that's one way to check your screens to make sure they're working. Another option, just reboot ProPresenter, and then check the converter boxes behind the computer. Sometimes I know, like at Monroe County, there's a little red decimator box that's a converter that sometimes just needs to get unplugged and plugged back in. They can get locked up, especially if things like power outages or power surges and stuff sits over time. It's just a good reboot's always healthy. Okay, so now we're gonna go over audio. So first things first with audio, to make sure it's working. ProPresenter 7 is a little different than ProPresenter 6, whereas I know in ProPresenter 6 everybody knew that you would go up here to the top right and you would come to your sound and you would select the output. ProPresenter 7, you don't necessarily have to do this, but it is a good backup to always just go ahead and select. So in live we use our Scarlett. Most rooms are Scarlett. I know in Amped and Blend it's Dante, and then I think Roane County is a Scarlett. I cannot remember, but I know that Bearden is the headphone output. You can always select up there, but make sure when you have ProPresenter open, if you're having audio issues, click on a video and watch over here on the right to see if the audio meters are showing anything. If there's nothing on those audio meters, it usually means it's the video and not actually ProPresenter itself. So that's the first thing to check. Another thing to do is go back up here to ProPresenter, just like we did for the screen settings. Go to Preferences, but go past Screens and go down towards the bottom of these tabs, click Audio, and it'll pull up another submenu right here. And as you can see, it gives you output options. So we have our Scarlett selected. It gives you more options usually than you need. Typically, we just do the first two. So for us, we've got this inspector layer with 2 devices, and usually that's the only 2 we'll touch. SDI and NDI, you shouldn't have to touch. That's a specific thing that we don't really use ever. But for us, we're just going to use our Scarlett. And if you're in a room that uses Dante, like in River Room or Amped, make sure it's on Dante. If you're at Bearden, make sure it's on the headphone output. And if you're at Roane County, make sure, I believe it's a Scarlett as well, that it's set to that. And that is how you set the audio settings in ProPresenter 7. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a couple very quick little fixes on things that sometimes might happen. So one of these is the go-to next timers. They're always set on your walk-in slides, and you can see that the slides have that by this little icon on top left that usually gives you just a number, which is the seconds it's set to. I like to use 8 seconds. It's a good time for a slide to be up and down. But I've had times where like maybe a new slide gets dropped in, or things get shuffled around a little bit, and a slide it'll go to the next slide, but then whatever slide, sometimes it'll get stuck on a slide that's in the middle. And either that is because that little go-to next timer is not there, or it's because it's on the last slide and it's missing the return to first. So the way to check that is you right-click the slide. So we'll do the last slide, and it should be set up. Go to your go-to next timer options, And so you see we have it set to 8 seconds. And every time you do it on the last slide, don't do it on the other slides, but every time you do it for the very last slide, make sure this little looped beginning box is checked, and it'll kick it back to the very first slide up here at the well. So you always want that. And you'll know it's working because this little guy on the right side underneath the preview screen, we talked about in an earlier video, it'll show that little advancing thing down here. If that's going, you should be good. And if that's not popping up, it usually means that you don't have a go to next set on a slide. So it's not a hard thing to add. You can just go down to and add go to next timer. Add it. You can do 8 seconds, 10 seconds, however long. It works great. Okay, so now we're going to talk about stage display not working. Like sometimes the singers get stuck where maybe the stage display is stuck on the wrong setting or it locks up. First thing to check, make sure you have your worship macro dropped on your first slide and that you have clicked it. If you're clicking it and nothing happens, it's locking it, make sure that it's the only cue option in the top left other than maybe like a media cue for a jump back. What you don't want to see, and I'll add it here, there is a cue that we used to use before the macros were a thing. So you can come, let's see, where's the cue? Add action, cue, stage display. So this little icon on the top left of the slide kind of looks like a stamp. We're not going to select anything because we're going to get rid of it. If that is on that slide as well, that can cause a lockup of the computer, or it can cause the stage display to lock up, not work. So you always want to remove those. So you would remove that action by going to right click, go to remove actions, and just remove stage. You just want that worship cue there to be your trigger. You don't want to see other triggers outside of like a media cue or like a go to next timer. Those are the only 2 cues you should see. And that should usually fix any lockups with the stage display. Okay, so that's our basic troubleshooting tips. Feel free to reach out and ask about other things maybe that we could do. We're always up for suggestions. I know maybe there's some other things I've missed in this that we could go and make another video on. I always like to try and update these things, keep them a little more current. I know with updates of the software and other things that sometimes we change up how we do things in system and flow. So feel free to reach out. On a weekend too, if you just get really stuck and none of these work for you, you can always text Chad or I, call us, use the Discord or the email. We should be available. I know sometimes we're going to get a hold of, especially if I'm video directing, I can't really help a whole lot. Or if Chad's on sound, like sometimes we're kind of stuck until we're at a breaking point. But always try and reach out, ask volunteers around you too. Some of them might be experienced enough and know how to fix it. So always feel free to just reach out.